So, uh, we're moving on to social dialects. Social dialect, I think, is the one that is less understood and poses more of a potential risk because these are dialectal differences. For example, African American English or vernacular would be a common one. And an example of a dialectal difference in Ebonics or AAE versus um, traditional English would be the F for TH substitution, maybe saying whiff or bathroom. And that is not a disorder. It's literally it's just a difference in their vernacular, their pronunciation. And, it's one thing if that's how all the kids, the culture and the vernacular that these kids are immersed in, that's how everyone's saying it and they say it the same way. It's that's not a disorder. They're just following their model. And it's okay to say things differently. And I think that not only when we talk about social dialect and culturally, but the other way I see this come into play is socioeconomic status and their dialect. Maybe if their grammar presents differently, or again, they have some different sound substitutions. But culturally, that's acceptable, and that's what they see and hear, and they're doing exactly that. Then I'm not going to think something's wrong if they're able to imitate what they hear all the time. And so instead of just expecting everyone to talk a certain way, I think that there's this line where we say, actually, that's just dialect, it's just a difference. Like, we don't need to be so worried about that. It becomes an issue though, and these young boys, or they're not young in this video, but they were young boys in a school, and they talk about how they felt discriminated against because of their African American English, and their mom talks about that too. And that's what we really need to be careful about. The hard part about this whole thing is that there are reasons that this could be concerning. Even if we're going to say anything that's non-standard English that is different is not substandard, our test scores don't reflect that. And so that second point talking about if they have competency in oral English, that is one thing because when they test, they need to be able to read and write in standard English, or it's going to affect their test scores and just their academic success. And so we're kind of stuck then unless we change the measure of success to include non-standard English, then we almost have to teach them standard English. It doesn't mean again that they would qualify for a disability because it's not a disability, but you can see where I'm going there, that it's part of them being successful. Standard English is the standard and is necessary for vocational success and in other areas in which some non-standard dialect speakers are branded as uneducated or ill-prepared if they sound different or write different. And I'll give you an example. One thing that a speech language pathologist can do is actually accent modification therapy, which basically means that if a person, a business person, typically an international student or business person would come to America and people would say, we can't understand you or your English is too poor, they would actually come to learn how to sound more Westerner, to s- to make sure that their accent kind of dissipated. And that's really hard for me because part of me, I want them to be successful. And if that's something they really choose and they want, that's fine. I hate the idea of pushing that false idea that there's only one right standard of English on people. But it's a big concern. And when I was in graduate school, I saw many students for accent modification that some international students were there, sought that while they were there to improve their oral English. And it was actually a college course they could take. And I was a grad assistant in that class. And I also came to learn that there are these really big international companies that actually hire speech pathologists to come in and provide those services to their international employees. And so it's just a fine line. I don't think it's all wrong. I think we can use it to help people um, that really are not intelligible have a fair shot at a good career and a successful life outcome here in America. But I just think we need to be careful about the boastfulness or this idea that non-standard English is less or that those that speak it are uneducated or unprepared. But when it comes to literacy, typically an English language learner, so speak moving now from just talking about dialectal difference, but to a true English language learner, meaning again, someone whose first language is not English. So there can be an English language learner that has great English because maybe they are well into um, middle school or high school and they have average intelligence. And so they have learned two languages. So they're technically an English language learner, but they're not behind. And then there's this group of English language learners that are struggling because of them learning English on top of their native language. And then there's this group that might actually have a disability on top of learning two languages. And those are three different categories, but I feel like it's a misconception to label them all as just English language learners and not separate them. Overall, though, English language learners typically lag behind peers. They just develop at a different rate because they're learning two languages instead of one. But there is a close relationship between spoken language skill and reading and writing. So, interestingly enough, this research study found that English language learners who did not have proficient spoken English by first grade ended up lagging behind their peers in reading. But those who were proficient in oral spoken English by first grade did not. They it they were able to kind of stay the course. So, I think that's really interesting when we think about things like, is there a critical period for language learning? This would kind of make you think so if there's such a drastic cutoff in success. Um, and it also just goes to show that early intervention is important. I mean, all this research supports these ideas we've already talked about. It's very interesting, though, um, knowing how important that that time period is and that oral language is in order for their reading, their literacy skills. And again, a common misconception is even if they're struggling in English, it doesn't mean that we want to assume that they're struggling in their first language. That's when we would really be looking at English language learners in special education because that's what you go in and do. You go in and you look at things in both languages to see are they struggling in the same areas in both languages. Um,